Hi, everyone. In this video, I want to cover some of the concepts regarding evaluative arguments, which we're going to be doing for this last major writing project. So, as you notice, if you kind of look through the chapter, one of the first the chapter starts out with is that evaluative arguments are everyday arguments. And what they mean by that is that these are arguments of value, and we often make these arguments with ourselves on a daily basis, right? So, when you wake up in the morning and you figure out what you're going to wear, that's an evaluative argument. You're making an evaluation of what clothes you're going to wear today. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that an evaluative argument is dependent on the audience and the situation, right? So, if you're getting up and you're late to class, you're probably just grabbing the first thing nearby to get dressed. But if you're going for a job interview, right, you're going to spend more time and energy in figuring out what your outfit's going to be. And so knowing your audience is a big part of what's going to help kind of define the criteria and the expectations when you craft an evaluative argument. So, but you need to obviously know your audience as well, right? So there's a difference between taste and judgment. So taste is just what you like, or I love this movie, whatever, things like that. Judgment is about making a claim, and what you're going to be doing in this paper really is you're making a claim of value. So you're not just saying, oh, this is a good or bad, whatever, or I like this. You're making a case for why this is worth the audience's attention or not, right? You could also be like, here's why you should avoid this at all costs. So so knowing your audience, right, going back to the idea of the job interview, if you're going in for an interview with, I don't know, let's say like an auto mechanic, right? If you walk in a tuxedo, you've clearly misread your audience. And that's not necessarily going to go well for you. On the other hand, if you're going to interview, with a major corporation like, I don't know, Microsoft, and you walk in and, jean cutoffs and a tank top, that again may not go well for you. So we make these arguments all the time in the everyday thing. And so what this last assignment asks you to do is kind of step back and think about what it is that you use to determine value, right? So if you like a movie or a game or technology, why is it that you like that? What is it about that technology or that game, that makes you like it? And how can you then communicate that and make a case for that to a larger audience? So that's where criteria come in, right? With every argument of evaluation, there's criteria. So you're going to make a determination about what it is that these criteria are. How do you figure out what is a good movie or a good book or whatever, right? And on some level, yes, this is about opinion, right? You get to make a case and say, here's why I like this, right? But even if, say, you really like Furious 7, does that necessarily mean just because you like it that it's one of the greatest films of all time? Okay. And so when you're thinking about your criteria, there's two types of evidence that the chapter talks about, qualitative and quantitative criteria. And so if you notice the roots of each one there, it's quality and quantity. And so qualitative criteria, when thinking about quality, those are things that might be left a little bit more up to personal opinion, but still there's going to be, a bar to set, right? You can't just say, Brad Pitt in his new movie had the greatest acting performance of all time, right? It doesn't just exist in a vacuum. So you need to understand the larger system, the larger genre, the medium of whatever it is you're talking about, the expectations there. So, qualitative criteria might be things, if you're talking about a film, like acting, plot, characters, things like that, cinematography. There are some ways to talk about them in terms of technique and how well it's done and everything, definitely. But sometimes there's it's less of a describable quantity, right? Whereas quantitative criteria, the quantity, and that's what we kind of think of as hard evidence. So that might be information you look at to think more about what, how successful was this movie, right? So when you look at something like how many tickets were sold, how much money a film made in its first weekend, how much it made over its entire run overseas, how many DVDs were sold, all that kind of stuff, that is quantitative criteria because you're talking about quantities. And it's hard evidence, and it's helpful to talk about a movie being successful, right? But there's also this kind of challenge because just because a movie sells a lot of tickets doesn't necessarily mean it's a great film, right? And we think about a great film, A great film might be one that didn't sell a lot. It didn't have a major run. It might have been, a smaller film, things like that. So you've got to understand your audience. So thinking about this, right, looking at how, say, when we talk about a great film, we're using a particular set of criteria. We're not thinking so much about how successful was it, but maybe we're thinking about, the plot, the acting, the story, the characters, or how invested we are, how just kind of overall great the film seems to be. And then comparing that to what was the most successful film of 2015, right? So looking at like Star Wars Episode 7, just the massive amounts of money it made. So it sold a ton of tickets, but there are plenty of people out there who liked it, loved it, didn't like it for a variety of reasons. And so you're kind of working with both. Now, depending on what you choose as your subject for this paper, you might have a few more quantitative criteria than qualitative, or vice versa. So if you're looking at a piece of technology, if you've chosen to look at like a cell phone or a laptop or a tablet or something like that, all the tech specs, those are quantitative criteria. That's hard evidence, right? You can say, oh, it has an 8.1 megapixel camera, right? It has this much memory. Here's how fast the processor runs, things like that. Now, what you also want to keep in mind that quantitative criteria are good, but they don't always tell us as much on their own, right? So even when you are evaluating something like a phone or a computer, there's lots of different factors involved. And so you want to keep in mind that one of the big things you always have to keep in mind is who's your audience. So let's say you want to talk about the iPad Pro, which is designed for businesses. It's meant to be a laptop replacement. You'll look at a review of one, I think a little bit later in the unit. So looking at this, you might say, okay, well, this is a great device. But the question is this device for everybody, right? If I want a new iPad, do I need an iPad Pro? And when you look at the review, you'll see that it's a pretty costly piece of technology, even more than a regular iPad. And while it's great, it's still not. A lot of the reviews say that it's not really kind of a laptop replacement. So if that's what you're looking for, it really isn't your device. Doesn't mean it's not a great tablet, right? But it doesn't necessarily do everything we want it to. And so as you're thinking about that, you're thinking about who the audience is. If it's somebody who's looking for a laptop replacement, right, as a business computer to give their employees, maybe it works, maybe they can afford it, but maybe not. So as you're working through this and thinking about your criteria, you're probably going to have some qualitative and some quantitative criteria, right? Now, if you're talking about an album or a television show or a movie, right, you're probably going to have more qualitative criteria. Viewership is good, tickets are good, sales are good, but you're going to be focusing a lot on the quality, right? So, what is this film? What genre especially does it fit in? That's kind of one of the things with, with entertainment you want to think about. Is it, thinking about genre in terms of horror films or romantic comedies, right? When we think about criteria, you have to think about both medium and genre. And so the chapter talks about how to formulate criteria. And as you're going to be looking through reviews. That's the best way to figure out criteria, because you can't just come up with criteria. You can't pick them out of a vacuum, right? You need to be thinking about the system they come out of, right? So if we're talking about, let's say if we're talking about a horror film, right? Or actually, let's step back for a second, right? Let's say we're talking about film, right? What are criteria we can use to evaluate all films, right? Usually, you can do acting, you can do plot, you can do music, special effects, costumes, set, cinematography, things like that. We come up with others, right? But that's kind of a general list, right? And pretty much every movie we can probably use to evaluate based on those criteria. But let's say now we kind of get down a little bit more into a specific genre, right? So let's talk about a horror film, right? So what is it about a horror film that we're looking for? Are we looking for great acting? Maybe. Probably not, right? We're looking for acting well enough to make sure we're not kind of taken out of the film. But beyond that, we're not looking for Oscar-worthy performances in horror films most of the time, right? Do we care about plot? Again, it's probably not necessarily going to be a super high-quality plot, right? Special effects, that'll be pretty important, right? When we're talking about a horror film, you want to really be sold. You want to be kind of invested. You want to believe in this kind of world that's being created, whatever the monster is, whatever the threat is. Music, huge for horror films, right? Music can make or break a horror film, thinking about the tone and some of the great soundtracks out there for horror films that really kind of sell the tension and things like that. They're very iconic, you know, looking like the Halloween theme, The Shining, things like that. So, but there might also be criteria specific to the genre that don't apply to all film that we'd look at, right? And so one criteria would be kind of overall scariness, right? Is this a scary movie? Is it a horror film? Does it meet that criteria? You know, if it's more dumb than scary, unless it's sold that way, you're probably not going to be happy with it if you're expecting, you know, a thrilling horror film. Now, let's switch genres, right? So let's jump now from horror to romantic comedy. Now, in a romantic comedy, most of the time, do we care as much about special effects, costume set? Yeah, probably not, right? You know, I mean, you know, it needs to be believable. You need to kind of fall in that world, but it's not something we're looking for as much as we would in a horror film. You know, obviously, horror wouldn't really be a criteria for romantic comedy. Instead, we'd be looking for two things, right? Romance and comedy. Is it funny, and is there a believable relationship, right? So that goes back to acting. So acting is pretty important. Again, we're not always looking for groundbreaking performances, but if we don't believe that, you know, the leads in a romantic comedy are falling in love, then trust me, having sat through several of them like that, it just drags on and on and on. It's very painful. So we have to believe that the lead actors have chemistry, right? That we're invested in their relationship. The plot's obviously important, you know, at least enough to, does it follow the plot of a romantic comedy? Are we invested? Do we kind of believe what's happening to these characters on screen? Music can be important. It just depends on the film, really, right? But so as you're thinking about whatever it is you're going to be reviewing, these are the things you want to think about. You know, first off, everything you look at is going to exist in a medium, right? Film, video games, television shows, music albums, cell phones, computers, whatever. And then beyond that, you also have to think about the particular genre, right? Horror, romantic comedy, historical drama, just straight comedy, right? Things like that. Or, you know, if you're looking at like games, right? First-person shooters, role-playing games, you know, massively multiplayer open role-playing games, right? There's all these different genres, and with each genre it brings its own set of expectations. So, you know, the best way to kind of figure out criteria is go look at reviews of similar subjects. So if you want to do The Martian, go look at reviews of other recent space films like Interstellar, even older films like 2001. Get a sense about what it is that audiences expect. And keep in mind also, though, that, you know, if you look at older reviews, our expectations change over time, right? What was scary in the 1950s, you know, kind of classic monster films, looks kind of hokey today. And so keep in mind that our tastes and our values change over time. So the last kind of thing I want to talk about, or the last two things that kind of go together, are that this, like I said, you're making an argument about a claim of value. So you're going beyond just saying, oh, this is a good or bad game, to why does the audience care about this? What value does it have, right? So if you're looking at a film or game in a series, right, does this, you know, put the story out new ways, or does this build on previous installments? Is it the same thing rehashed over and over again, and they're just trying to get your money? You know, so what is it that you want to say about your subject beyond just, oh, it's fun or not fun, or enjoyable or not enjoyable, whatever? And so you want to think about the claim of value, what it is you're trying to argue for your reader. And to do that, then you're going to have to provide evidence, and that's going to come partially from the sources, but as I mentioned in the video introducing the assignment, right, a lot of the sources you're finding are just about context. So that might be where you find information about the qualitative criteria, the quantitative criteria, right? The ticket sales, tech specs, things like that. Now, a lot of the evidence, though, is just going to come from the subject itself, right? A lot of your review hinges on you being able to relate to your reader, your experience watching the film, playing the game, using the technology, whatever that is. So there's a lot of primary research, primary evidence from what you've experienced with the subject you're reviewing. And that's really going to be where you make your case, right? So it's important that when you're evaluating specific criteria that you pull on examples. You don't just say, oh, the acting was pretty good. Pull on a particular performance or set of performances, right? If you're talking about plot, most reviews don't give away the entire plot. You don't necessarily want to spoil the ending, but you want to give your reader a good sense about why this is, an interesting plot. It's new, it's unique, it's kind of tired and we've seen it 20 times before, things like that. So, as you're looking at your subject, as you're playing it, watching it, whatever, and doing the research for this assignment, think about specific examples. That's going to be really important for you to provide evidence for your reader and to really make your case. So, these are things to think about. There's another video for you to watch that kind of covers the basics as well. If you have questions about criteria, about your subject, anything like that, feel free to send me an email or post it in the Unit 3 discussion board, and I'll be looking over those questions and making sure, I answer them as they come up.